Hey guys, Tom Barclay here in my car after the Southampton game. Had to leave the game quite quickly because of issues with car parking, so this is where I am doing it. A fantastic win for Tottenham, 5-0. Great win for Ange Postecoglou, just what he needed after what's been a pretty rough time with his walking wounded, his various amounts of players out injured or suspended. It was one win in 7 games, or 8 games actually going into this. And this was the first win in 6, but a very, very comprehensive one against a pretty woeful Southampton team. But overall, just what the doctor ordered from Ange Postecoglou's point of view and his side. Lots to get into. A fascinating game, fascinating atmosphere. Fans playing their part in lots of different ways on both sides. And just a really, really good win for Spurs. Just to set the scene a little bit, this was the scene, St Mary's, of that amazing, that's my car right there, that amazing meltdown from Antonio Conte, 18 months ago, maybe more, in March 2023, March last year. I was actually in the mix zone at the time speaking to Oliver Skipp rather than being in the press conference where he had that epic rant about the club, about the players, maybe about the owner, albeit that may have been slightly misconstrued perhaps, I'm not quite sure, but basically talking about 20 years of mediocrity, I suppose, or lack of winning for anything and playing under pressure. And he went out in a sort of blaze of glory or torching the whole club pretty much, and actually was never seen again. He got sacked a little while later. I remember it was 10:21 on a late night. I remember when the news came through and had to quickly write up about it. But this was a very different occasion that day. You know, Spurs obviously threw it away from 3-1 up, 3-all. Pretty sure it was never a penalty, to be honest. But look, I think the seeds have been set or been planted anyway for Conte's exit anyway, whatever happened. So that was that. This one, you know, very different situation. Definitely a much swifter press conference and a much more sort of pleasant press conference with Ange Postecoglou. Pretty quick one, to be fair, but generally he was just pretty happy. And I'll come on to some of his comments in a bit. So let's talk about the game. Spurs went into it with, I think, 10 players unavailable to them, 10 first team players, you know, a mix of injury and suspension. Obviously, we know about the injuries, suspension to the likes of Bentancur and Basuma as well, meaning that Jed Spence got his first start in the Premier League for Tottenham. Actually, it might be the first start in any competition for Tottenham. 2.5 years pretty much after he signed. Jed Spence, to link it back to Conte, it's been a funny old career he's had at Spurs. Obviously got signed. Took ages for that deal to get over the line. They signed him for about 12.5 million, lots of add-ons as well from Middlesbrough. Then I remember being in Seoul on a pre-season tour. Conte, we were having a chat with him about something completely different. He, unprompted, brings up Spence, depicts him as a club signing, then goes on to never really play him, gets frustrated when he's asked about him. Spence then goes out on loan to Leeds last season. He's supposed to be there for the year, has his loan cut short halfway through. Generally, it's accepted was due to his attitude, or they weren't happy with him at Leeds. Then he went on loan to Genoa the second half of last season. They had an option to buy him. They didn't take it up, albeit Italian teams don't generally have a lot of money. So he comes back. Everyone's expecting him to go this summer, but he comes back into the fold under Postecoglou, who says he's very impressed with his attitude. But then, even with that, he doesn't actually get much of a look in. Obviously, he's omitted for the Europa League squads. He's kind of the victim of this homegrown rule situation, unfortunately, for Spurs, lacking homegrown players, so meaning they could only take a 23-man contingent so far in their Europa League squad, and he was basically the fall guy for it. But even so, fans have been starting to sort of call for him to get a chance. Postecoglou hadn't exactly been bowled over in some of his recent comments about Spence, but had, I think, a few weeks ago suggested that he would get his chance around this period, in the festive period, and lo and behold, he starts, and he was excellent. He got tired in the second half, but wow, what an impact from the first 38 seconds where he gets the ball, drives up the pitch and plays the most beautifully threaded through ball for James Maddison, who tucks it away under Alex McCarthy, giving Spurs just a perfect start. 1-0 after, like I say, 38 seconds I think we clocked it at. And all round I thought he was good and did well from an attacking threat. When Udogie came off injured, midway through that half, which was, I guess, the one downside. He's apparently felt something in his quad. Fingers crossed it was more precautionary. Then Spence had to go to left back, so obviously that's not his natural side of foot, natural position, so maybe it wasn't quite as effective there. But I think overall he played really well, and probably justified quite a lot of people calling for Jed Spence to get more game time. And suddenly, as I think my friend Dan Kirkpatrick was talking about in the ahead of the game, when Bergvall, who came in for his first Premier League start, and Spence play like this, suddenly the squad looks a bit deeper than perhaps it had looked at before. With the caveat being it was Southampton. They've got 5 points now from 16 games. They're obviously the worst team really in the Premier League, and so it's one thing doing it against them. It's another thing doing it. Well, actually, to be fair, that's what we've said against Spurs are able to beat the best. It's about the consistency, isn't it? But from sort of Spencer's and Bergvall's perspective, they need to be able to contribute regularly. But it was encouraging, I would say, really encouraging. Then after that, Spurs had a sort of 1-2 punch, 12 minutes, 14 minutes to take the game away completely from Southampton. And from there, it all really imploded at home. I've been to Southampton a lot, covered them a lot over in the last sort of 10 years, not for a little while, but pretty unhappy atmosphere, particularly Russell Martin. So first of all, the first goal that goes in for number 2 was a Maddison cross that skims off the top of Bednarek's head, falls sort of perfectly for Son Heung-min, the captain for Spurs. But the way it's been going with it for him in front of goal, albeit it did score against Chelsea, I know recently, he's got a few from the penalty spot. He really needed a goal like this, a real sort of clinical finish to go in, to sort of restore his confidence. I feel like I see a player in Son who's been lacking a bit in confidence, and he tucked it away beautifully. Like we know, he can. That's 124 goals in the Premier League. It should not be overlooked what a great player he's been. It's just the question mark has been essentially, are his best days behind him because of his age? He's looked it a little bit of late, but I thought he was back to his best tonight. He was fantastic. Wonderful finish for that goal. And then a hand in I think got 2 assists later on, but had a hand in pretty much all the other goals to come. So after that was on 12 minutes, and then on 14 minutes, Son gets a sort of lovely ball over the top, fires in a cross. Solanke goes for it. Bednarek does just about enough to stop Solanke from scoring, but can't get anywhere near Kulusevski, who's there for the rebound. Turns it in to make it 3-0. And at that point, the Saints fans started turning on Russell Martin. Chants of I'm trying to remember the exact wording, but essentially Martin, get out of the club. Russell Martin, your football is SHIT was one of them. And then later on in the game, he got a chance of getting sacked in the morning by his own fans. So it was a pretty grim night for him. I will come on to some of the Spurs chanting as well, because that was a big part of this game. It almost felt like some of that might have been sparked by some of the raucous chants from the Spurs end, not towards Martin, but just generally towards the owner, the chairman, which I'll come on to. And from what I'm told with Russell Martin, obviously it's a Spurs video, but from Russell Martin's perspective, that was by far and away the most sort of anti-Russell Martin that Southampton fans have had this season. So they clearly were not happy at all. At that point, he makes a substitution, which we felt really sorry for the lad who came off, bring Nathan Wood on, but to be honest, it didn't make a whole lot of difference, at least in that half. Spurs on, I think, 25 minutes went to 4-0. Son again with the assist, laying in the excellent Pape Sarr. He had a great game. Lovely dancing feet, getting round the Southampton backline, then a really good finish. Pape Sarr, there have been times this season, like all the Spurs players, I suppose, he's looked a bit tired, a little bit leggy, but he's also had some really, really good moments, and today he was fantastic. I thought he was really, really good, along with Bergvall and Maddison in the middle. And then just before half-time, you would have blinked and missed it, and Russell Martin literally had already gone down the tunnel before this goal went in, saying he thought it was 3 minutes rather than 4 minutes up for injury time, is what he said after the game, and that's why he'd already gone to sort of prepare his half-time team talk. And then James Maddison goes and makes it 5 from the acutest of angles. Reminded me a bit of that Frank Lampard goal against Barcelona for Chelsea in the Champions League, the really famous goal. It was just, that was more of a sort of curled chip rather than a sort of almost kind of blast he hit it from, but the angle was so against him, it just showed what a brilliant finish it was. And Maddison was really good, along with Son. And we know with James Maddison, he's blown hot and cold this season. Blown hot and cold for over a year now, ever since he had that injury against Chelsea in the 4-1. And he's almost been like the personification of Tottenham's inconsistency. But when he's on it, he's really, really good. And he's the kind of player who could really, really exploit sort of weak teams like Southampton were. And Ange afterwards talked about Son and Maddison being the sort of catalyst for this victory. He was really happy with his senior players, and those two were the sort of front and centre of that. Maddison, of course, at that point, 5-0 at half-time, I'm getting sort of recalls in my mind of the 9-0 against Leicester, which I was at. That infamous 9-0 record-breaking home defeat against Leicester back in 2019. Ralph Hasenhüttl was in charge. The big difference then was Ryan Bertrand was sent off after 12 minutes. And that's when Southampton really fell apart, and Jamie Vardy, I think, got a hat-trick. Maddison scored that day. But if anything, Southampton were worse at that point in this game. And at 5-0, you really, really feared it might be a similar scoreline. Didn't work out that way. Second half, there were no more goals. It felt like Tottenham, given the state of play with their injuries and the game was won, they kind of took their foot off the gas a little bit and reserved some energy. Son didn't come out for the second half, for example. I think that was just to protect him, given that he's sort of back to form and with a massive game against Man United on Thursday. But overall, just a really, really good performance all round. Like I say, I thought Sonny, Maddison, Sarr, Spence, Bergvall in his first Premier League start. Shout out for Alfie Dorrington, who came on for his first appearance for Tottenham, I think it was. But they all did very, very well. And it was just a really, really all-round good victory. It could be more. Timo Werner came on later on, obviously, after his, assessment that Ange gave it, rather than criticism of his performance against Rangers. But if anything, he was very unlucky not to get an assist because he had a lovely ball across where Johnson really should have scored, and he's been burying those all this season. But unfortunately, he got his shot wrong for Johnson and Werner's perspective for a sixth. But 5 was more than enough. And yeah, it was a good game, but I suppose that is only sort of half the story of this win, because before the game even kicked off, there were chants of against Daniel Levy, who was at the match, and they were pretty consistent throughout the game. For example, when they scored the opener, it was almost straight away the away fans decided to sing anti-Levy chants again quite quickly afterward, almost to like reiterate the point, or the wider point from this match was their feedback they wanted to give the owner, who they are clearly not happy with. And that happened throughout the game, really. So we're at this point, I suppose, where until it starts to really, really pick up again, this just keeps happening, I guess. We keep coming back to this situation with the fan frustration with the ownership. I understand all the reasons that they have for this particular frustration when they look at the lack of trophies in the last 20 years. But yeah, that's kind of the situation we're in. Can't have been an easy night from Levy's perspective when he was hearing that, given that his team were actually battering Southampton, but obviously one win against a basement bottom team of Southampton won't erase all the ill feeling at the moment. And the same goes for Ange to a certain extent, not the ill feeling, but the sort of doubts about him and his sort of process and his project, I suppose. One victory against Southampton, a poor Southampton team's not going to change it, but it's definitely a really good start to what is a pivotal week for him and his team. It couldn't have gone better really tonight, and they were really good, and it showed you, just as James Maddison said after the game, that they can blow any team away, as they did with Man City. It's just about stringing that consistency together. And when they've got so many injuries at the moment, which as many fans have pointed out, is a key factor. So they would have been really impressed with that. I actually asked Ange after the game about that. There was a moment where he went to the fans after the final whistle, and it wasn't just after the final whistle they started singing his name, but they did it during the game as well, which was quite significant, I suppose, given that, was it the last away game in the Premier League at Bournemouth? They obviously had that confrontation with the fans at full time 10 days ago, where it felt like some of the fans were, if not turning on Postecoglou, then really venting their frustration like he hadn't really experienced before. So it showed, and as he pointed out at the time, it was significant because it's the away supporters doing it. So if it's significant when they're getting frustrated and venting their fury at him, it should equally be significant when they're singing his name, particularly having done the opposite the last time out. So that does bode well for him and the sort of re-amending of any kind of damaged element of the relationship, if he can build it from here. Obviously, the next game is absolutely enormous. Man United at home in the League Cup on Thursday, and I'll do a video after Wednesday's press conference and we'll get into that. But that's obviously more significant than this victory. But with Liverpool after that on the horizon, Forest away after that, Nuno, there's a real sort of tricky period he's going through at the moment with some of these some of these games that if they went wrong, could land him in sort of hot water. But what a start with this victory! All round, really, really excellent, and I guess it's from here upwards and onwards, I suppose, for Ange, if he can build it against Man United. Let's see what happens.